Welcome back to Season 3 of the Dudes of the Dead podcast. If you missed Season 1 or Season 2, including our top 10s of 2021 and 2022, you can find all of our previous episodes on Apple, Spotify, Anchor, and Google. I'm Leatherface Lee.
And I'm Maniac Mike. This season, we've added an email for the show, dudesofthedead@gmail.com. Feel free to email us your thoughts on the films we discuss, and we're also asking for listener requests for Season 4. So email us a film if you'd like us to review it in Season 4, whether it's a personal favorite, a controversial film, or a hidden gem starring Nicolas Cage.
We can't wait for you to listen to Season 3, including some appearances from friends of the pod, as well as some bonus episodes. We're also on YouTube at Dudes of the Dead Podcast.
This season, we're excited to review some standouts from 2022, some older classics, and as well as some new films from 2023. We'd also greatly appreciate if you'd be willing to leave us a rating and a review. Thanks for joining us again, and
we'll see you in the aisles. Welcome back, listeners. This is our Daughters of Darkness episode 1971.
Silly tales about ghouls chased away by garlic and vampires shrinking from crosses.
Ah, you will. After a while, it'll only be the remembrance of a bad dream, and then the remains of a remembrance. Who do you think I am? A kind of ghoul? A vampire? How revolting it may be. But then things were slightly different in those days. A holy king of France, even a pope, drank blood to stay young and healthy.
Directed by Harry Kumel. It's got 6.5 on IMDb. The critic score for Rotten Tomatoes is 80%, and the audience score is 60%. Cast is Delphine Seyrig, who plays Countess Elizabeth Báthory. John Carlin is Stefan. Andrea Rao is Ilona, and Danielle Ouimet is Valerie. So this is a very vague summary because, as we'll talk about in just a second, it's difficult to discuss this film without giving away some key things. But basically what happens in this film is, while passing through an off-season vacation resort in Ostend, Belgium, a newlywed couple encounters a mysterious, strikingly beautiful countess and her aide/secretary. So I chose this film because of the buzz that it gets on different critic lists, and because of the praise that Evolution of Horror, Mike Munster's podcast, has given for this film. Now, what we're going to try to do, which Mike and I have talked about a few times, is to discuss this film spoiler-free. So the first bit will be spoiler-free. We will give our recommendation, and then we'll give you another heads up that we're going into spoilers, because there's some specific things, I think mostly for Mike,
yes,
that he wants to, air quotes, discuss, and he needs to be able to get some details. So,
and there's some very major twists in this one that reveal a lot, so it would be a shame to go into this without spoiled. So I think generally it's great if you can watch the movie before you listen to the podcast, but this way we accommodate people who've seen it or not seen it.
This is going to appeal to a specific audience. I think if you're interested in the history of horror films, if you're interested in European film, if you're interested in art house kind of out there stuff, this might tick those boxes for you. It might.
Or it might not.
If my description that I just gave makes you cringe, then I would probably avoid this film. But just to jump in, I'm going to say that this is one of the better lesbian vampire films.
Yeah, that's a very specific genre. I can't actually say that I've seen many vampire
we watched
lesbian
one a couple
films.
Years ago.
Was that Walking Home in the Dark?
No. Shoot, I should have looked up the name of it. We did watch one with two women vampires who had lured a gentleman, and it was definitely the same era. It was
okay. That's kind of
70s.
ringing a bell, actually.
Yeah. So this is a very specific kind of era of film in general, but horror films. I mean, I think one of the things that recommends this is that it's a transition between kind of that universal horror film, the Hammer, scary horror movies of the 60s, and into the exploitation films of the 70s. This is a crossover kind of film. And lesbian vampire films, and that sounds like a crazy moniker, but they were a thing at one point. And I think there's a convergence of all kinds of things going on, not only in the film industry, but socially and politically as well. And so this is reflected in the films. I think I'm going to just say a couple of positive things, and I'm going to turn it over to Mike. I mean, I think they do an interesting thing with the Elizabeth Báthory legend in this one, and that's been in a lot of vampire films. Basically, a Hungarian countess, the legend goes. It was the Kingdom of Hungary at the time, but it's actually modern day Slovakia. Legend has it that she would bathe in the blood of virgins. And I've heard the count anywhere from 300 to 600.
A lot of winners coming to that part of the world with Vlad the Impaler and her, and yeah.
Exactly. And there's lots of lore. I mean, just Google it and you'll find some things. So I think that was kind of interesting what they did with that. The movie is definitely has erotic elements. It's stylized. It has sexy elements to it. I liked the use of color in the film, the look of the film. The lead, Delphine Seyrig, is definitely modeled after sort of a 30s, 40s film star. The director, Harry Kumel, said he specifically modeled her on Marlene Dietrich. So there's definitely some things that I think are really interesting visually about the film.
That's interesting, actually, because the film is a 70s film, but she did seem sort of out of place. She
Totally.
did seem like from an earlier era. It always makes the film seem earlier than 70s, maybe for that reason.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
And I think there's some interesting, certainly her look, her hairstyle, her mannerisms.
Even the way she talks, yeah.
Exactly. Very sort of 30s, 40s film star. Even like I found when I went back and rewatched it, some of the softer focus effects and some of the like sequin gowns that she's wearing in different things is very, very reminiscent of that era of film where the starlet, I think I read somewhere that, there's other ways to do this. You can put Vaseline on the lens of a camera to get a soft focus.
Oh, interesting.
But I read that in the old film days, they used to put a stocking over the lens of the camera because it was written into their contracts for the big stars that they had to have a soft focus so that their skin looked smooth and that they didn't have any hard lines or wrinkles or anything. So all of those things are here. And I think Kumel is trying to pay homage to that era. I like his use of color, the fact that he focuses on black, red, and white, which he's gone on record as saying he wanted the Báthory character to be reminiscent of Nazi Germany.
Oh, that's interesting.
And then, so there's those reds, blacks, and whites, but the rest of the film is kind of desaturated almost.
Now, did you find, I think one of my complaints, I feel like he really hit you over the head with the red.
For sure.
Like, they fade to red in this movie like 14 times.
Yeah.
And I found that a bit overbearing. Like, I feel like it could have been effective if the final fade to credits was in red.
Right.
And they were wearing a lot of red lipstick. So I feel like there's something like Schindler's List where you have the red coat, which is subtle and effective. Or even Censor, we talked about the use of blue and red.
Yeah.
Or in Men, we talked about red and green. For me, the color part almost felt a bit unsophisticated in this case because it just felt almost overbearing or over the top. Did you feel like it was overused? Like, I kind of like that when it's more subtle in the background where you kind of have to look for it rather than like, I definitely noticed the red because I felt like it was very overemphasized.
So I think I'm agreeing with you, but what I wonder is that because of the era, because this is early days, arguably this is an experimental kind of art housey kind of film. So is he doing that because he doesn't think his audience is going to pick up on it if he's too subtle? Whereas a modern audience has that reaction where it's like, okay, you're hitting me over the head with this. I'm used to this. I'm used to those techniques in modern film.
Perhaps. Yeah, it is so tricky to put yourself in the mind of someone from that era because given the context of the films you would have seen up to that point, to what extent is this all new and refreshing and unique versus coming to it as a modern viewer? And I will say I do like art house films, and I do appreciate some of my favorite films are from the 70s. I think it's one of the best decades for horror. But yeah, something about this one didn't quite do it for me.
Well, and I think, what comes to mind is if you think about 1960s Psycho, the shower scene terrified people. Well, that doesn't stand. I think it's a great film. I think that scene still stands up, but not as terrifying as it would have been in 1960.
We've raised the bar so much now. Yeah, right? That makes sense.
So I wonder, I don't know for sure. I just wonder if that's what's happening here a little bit is because we're so used to the sophistication of modern film and how far we've come. What are we talking, 40 plus years?
Yeah, 50. It's like 50-year-old film now, yeah.
I just wonder if that's some of what our reaction, because I had similar reactions to certain things.
Yeah.
And I just thought, okay, yeah, that's not very sophisticated, or they could have done this or they could have done that, right?
But on the other hand, when you compare it to films of that era, I mean, Exorcist is 1973, and that's my number one film of all time. So yes, it's an older film, but then on the other hand, if you compare it to other films coming out around a similar time, I do feel like maybe it has some drawbacks.
Oh, there's no question. And I mean, I certainly...
And I don't know what the budget was like for this film.
I was just going to say, I mean, you're also comparing, Exorcist was a major studio film, right?
Which is fair, yeah.
So it would just be like today comparing a major studio film to an indie film. It's something that doesn't work because you've got... And sometimes it works against them because they try to do things because they have the budget.
Yes.
That actually detract from the film. I'm thinking CG and things like that, right? It's like, well, we've got all this money. We'll just throw it at it. Well, it doesn't make it any better if it's a stinker of a film, right? But yeah, why don't you jump? I mean, I've got other things to say, but why don't you jump in? And I know you have some strong opinions.
I do. Well, first, I guess I'll say, like, I'm glad you chose this film. I will say the vampire genre is actually, I have a lot of gaps in my vampire film. I have a lot to go and back and watch, actually. I like possession films. I've watched a lot of zombie films. I've kind of caught up on a lot of the slasher films. There's a lot of vampire films I feel like I need to go back and see. So I was happy to be watching this one. Full disclosure, I did not like this film, but there were a few things I liked. I thought the soundtrack was good. I was enjoying the music. No doubt the performance by Delphine Seyrig was the highlight for me. Like, I think she did a great job. Her performance was great. I don't think this is a spoiler, but there was one shot of her up on a cliff top, which I thought was very striking and effective. And to me, like, that was maybe the best shot of the film.
Yeah.
And for sure, if you are a vampire historian or a film historian and you are interested in like the evolving representation of vampires in film, then I can see how this is doing something kind of revolutionary and different. And so I can appreciate it in its historical context.
Yeah.
That's about as much as I liked about this movie. I think my biggest gripe, I mean, I've got some specifics, which we can talk about afterwards, but I really found the couple super unbelievable. Psychologically, Stefan is a complete asshat. I really hated his character, which I think you're supposed to hate his character.
I think so too, yeah.
But the disconnect for me was, how did she ever fall in love with this person in the first place? Because there are narcissists and there are psychopaths and sociopaths, but I feel like their mode is they do horrible things, but then they can also be charming and manipulative where they kind of win them back. This guy's just a complete dick to her the entire movie, and he keeps like, there's a point where he hits her in the face in public, and then she just keeps going back to him. In the next scene, we'll see her like trying to cuddle with him or like snuggle with him. And I really struggled with the believability of this couple because he was such an ass, but he didn't have that nuanced like manipulative side or charming side to kind of counterbalance. I'm just like, how did you ever? Why would you ever fall in love with this guy in the first place? So I don't know. Did you have a reaction to that? Because there'd be a scene that would cut with them in some kind of conflict, but then the very next scene, she'd be cuddling him again or fawning all over him without any kind of resolution or no attempt by him to win her back. So like the psychological believability of them as a couple, I really struggled with because he's just a monster to her the entire movie, but without any kind of redeeming side.
I think what's missing and what would probably help you understand or help the believability part is they're not very well developed characters. It's, I mean, not even plot, but it's style over substance. This isn't a character study, right? I mean, this really is a vehicle for the Báthory character, Delphine Seyrig's character. Everything else is kind of secondary almost. I totally get what you're saying.
Yeah.
I just think also for the era, I don't think it was uncommon for, just like it is now, for some men to be monsters to women and that cycle of abuse continuing.
Totally.
Right?
But you think like in the 70s, it seems like we start to see films, so like Black Christmas, where women are like pushing back and are stronger.
For sure.
And so I guess for me, like it was hard for me to sympathize with her character. I mean, I felt bad for her, but then I was also so frustrated with her. I'm like, why are you going back to this?
Yeah.
But I can concede those points. And I guess if you are making a film that's style over substance, but yet your film is mostly characters in rooms talking, it's hard maybe not to then critique the character development, because there actually isn't a whole lot plot-wise that happens in this movie.
No.
Actually, and to your point, like apparently there's a story where the director slapped Valerie in the face on the set of this film, and then Stefan punched him in the face.
Holy cow.
And that like totally altered like the dynamics of the set afterwards. So yeah, to your point about men being abusive jerks, apparently that actually happened ironically in this film about that subject matter.
Holy cow. That I hadn't come across that story. That's super interesting because that reminds me of William Friedkin in The Exorcist.
Yeah, it adds a whole other layer to this one actually, given the content. So like I'm in the minority. Like I was shocked when I went and read the reviews. Like the reviews for this film are pretty glowing overall.
Yeah.
Yet when I would dig into like the user comments, it seemed like the dialogue people found really frustrating, which I found very frustrating. And like some of the things that happen seem a bit implausible perhaps. And we can get to that later. But yeah, I mean, people definitely seem to appreciate this film, which normally I can even see if I didn't like a film, but critics like it. I'd be like, yeah, I can see that. With this one, I don't know. I struggle a bit more.
Well, and I actually came across this. I thought I'm going to have to defend this film. So in the early 2010s, Time Out magazine conducted a poll with authors, directors, actors, and critics who have worked in the horror genre to vote on their top 100 horror films. And Daughters of Darkness was 90 in the top 100.
Shameful.
So, I mean, I think, for me, again, looking at a film historically, and I'm taking this as a cultural thing as opposed to, I think we could make some fairly strong critique in terms of a standalone film. But a film in the context of the time, I think there's some super interesting things going on about female politics and gender dynamics. And you've mentioned some of those things with Stefan's character being, such a monster to Valerie. So there are elements that are dated, but a couple of things that I found that I struggled with. One was there's very little character development. The other thing is Stefan definitely has some secrets going on that are hinted at, but not explained to any extent. And we're going to dive into that a little bit in the spoiler part of the conversation. But one of the things is, and this isn't a spoiler, I don't think, because it's very obvious in the film, he seems to be a bit sadistic.
Oh, yeah.
And maybe it's more than seems. He is sadistic. But it doesn't go anywhere with that. It doesn't say, where does that come from? Where does it go to? I actually, early in the film, wondered if Stefan's character was a vampire as well.
Oh, interesting.
And there was going to be some kind of dynamic between the Báthory character and Stefan. And that didn't happen. Stefan's he just enjoys seeing other people in pain.
Yeah, I found all the interactions between the characters to be kind of forced and unnatural and not believable. And maybe that's part of it. They weren't well explained or didn't feel like real people. I don't know. Yeah.
I mean, one of the things, it's funny because she doesn't have a lot of screen time, but I actually liked Ilona's character. Andrea Rao, is that her name?
Yeah, she was interesting.
What I liked about her is that as the aide or secretary to the, she's basically a companion to Báthory's character.
But they're lovers, right?
It seemed to me that they were lovers and that she's also a vampire. And she seems quite tired.
Yeah, she makes a comment, right? At one point, like, was it I'm tired of being alive? Or Yeah.
And I found for a 50-year-old film, they're delving into that comes in way later about the idea of being tired of living and the exhaustion of just being alive for that long. And so I found that kind of interesting in her character. She has this angst about her and this loneliness that to me was not only reminiscent of where the vampire genre would go in the future, but also that part was very believable to me.
Yeah. Do you think that that's just about the eternal life of being a vampire and being tired of life? You see a lot of different narratives that kind of explore that exhaustion of having eternal life, and it's actually not all it might be cracked up to be.
Exactly, right?
Now, did you find it interesting, like this is a lesbian vampire film. Mm-hmm. It is very open about having lots of sex and nudity, yet you never really see any lesbian interactions. That's always off screen or it's implied.
It's implied.
But that's kind of interesting, right? If the whole point is like we're kind of highlighting lesbian vampires to then have some romantic elements.
Particularly,
what do you make of that?
What surprised me was for a European film in 1971, it seemed like they would go further down that road than they do.
Yeah.
And that
like with Alona, it's only ever kind of, you have to guess. I don't think they ever show any romantic interaction between those two.
And in fact, she seduces Stefan after Valerie leaves.
Yeah.
And
I guess Bathory goes into Valerie's room and she's lying topless on the bed, but they still never show like even a kiss, I don't think.
No, they could just be very close, like best friends, right?
Yeah.
I mean, as far as you know.
But then it's weird that this gets upheld as like a vampire lesbian film when that's not really an element of the film.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely strongly suggested, but there's no explicit scenes where they show that.
But there's lots of explicit sex between Stefan and Valerie. So yeah, interesting.
And I mean, the one, and I wish I could remember the name of it, the one that I referenced earlier where there was the two women vampires who seduce a man.
Yes.
I definitely remember there being some explicit lesbian sex scenes in that one, whereas in this one, it's not there.
No.
And I don't it's hard to know without doing some deep digging. Was that something that was going on in terms of the time period and they were trying to make a certain cut for a specific like film board rating? I don't know in Belgium at the time.
Yeah, perhaps.
Right? Like it's just, I don't know enough about the historical context of that.
Yeah, which I would get if there was no nudity whatsoever, no sexuality whatsoever. Totally. But there is lots of nudity and sexuality, just not lesbian, which is, if that's the point of the film. It's just a bit puzzling.
And typically in North American film, you get full frontal female nudity.
Yes.
And in European film, you get pretty much equal opportunity frontal nudity. And in this one, there just seems to be, more heterosexual sex and just the hinted at lesbian relationships. I mean, it's very strongly hinted at, again, the influence that Bathory's character has on Valerie.
Yes.
And that's, again, I think that's playing into, at least as far as I see it, that's playing into some of the feminine politics of the time. Like you've got this strong, older female character almost mentoring a younger female to like, you don't need to put up with Stefan's character and his abuse. You can be a strong woman on your own with other strong women.
Yeah.
Now, of course, I mean, that's on a political level. The ulterior motive is that she needs another companion, and she already had her eye on Valerie right from the very beginning.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but there's a lot implied in this film with not a whole lot explained. Yes. Now, what's your take? Were you scared during this movie? Like, what do you think of this as a horror film? And even the vampire elements of this are very light.
It's more implication than anything else.
Because entering this is, again, held up as like a famous vampire film, but really there's very little vampiric elements to the film. At no point was I scared. And even the horror elements are pretty underplayed. It's more of almost like a soap opera kind of drama.
It is. And I see it being more gothic in that sense. It's more about atmosphere, mood, and suggestion as opposed to explicit horror. So to answer your question, no, I wasn't scared. Yes, I think the horror elements are quite a bit lighter. I think there's a lot of gaps that you have to be actively imagining and filling in order for there to be any connection to a horror film.
Yeah. That seems to be a theme in all elements of this film. You have to fill in a lot of gaps, and maybe I don't know.
But, it's interesting to me that it isn't a similar film at all in terms of its look or anything, but it reminds me of the praise, and I don't think you've seen this one either, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is a similar era. It's early 70s.
I've definitely heard of that one. I feel like it's been on my list. I don't know if I've seen that one, though.
It's definitely one to check out. And again, things are suggested there. And I wonder if in terms of indie filmmaking, if it was kind of a style of filmmaking at the time where if you don't have the budget to actually materialize what you're thinking, because even the one scene where it becomes obvious that it's vampiric, it's a bit challenging as a scene from a modern viewer's eyes.
Yeah.
It's definitely got the little bit of blood that we see in the film is that 70s. It reminds me of Italian blood, right? Yes. It's very red. It's very fake. Viscous. So very fake.
Yeah. I try not to hold that against it because I get that's probably a budgetary more of the time. So that's fine.
Totally.
But it did take me out of it a little bit, but I'll excuse that point.
And I think it was the special effects for Romero.
Tom Savini?
Tom Savini. He's talked about the fact that he spent a lot of time because he was around in this era and, started working on special effects after his time in Vietnam and was working on blood and taking this idea of this red, really unrealistic blood, particularly the European films, and trying to come up with a better formula that would look more realistic. And of course, his life experience enabled him to be able to do that.
Yeah, from all the documentaries I watch, it seems like he kind of single-handedly changed the entire standard for like gore and horror films because of his experience in Vietnam. So yeah, that's cool. So this is pre-Savini, I guess.
Yeah, I was going to say, and if you look at a lot of the Italian horror films of this era, the Argento films or Fulci or whatever, it's all the same, right? I mean, it's that really, really red. And I also wonder, because I'm thinking of Argento in terms of this, again, like if you look at something like Suspiria, it's very stylized.
Totally.
It's very, the colors are super vibrant. They're super in your face. And it's a look. They're trying to accomplish something, I think, that's beyond the film. They're not looking to be realistic at all.
Yeah.
Right? Now, I mean, I think Argento does it better than this film, to be fair.
I feel like I appreciate the style, but I need a little more substance to go with my style. Yeah. And I feel like you should be capable. Why not have a super compelling story? I mean, the reviews are high for this. Can you explain to me the role of the detective in this film?
No.
Because that bothered me as well.
Well, again, it's one of those things where, so you throw a character in there, he says a couple of things, and then you off him part of the way through the film.
Spoilers.
And but he's a useless character. He does not other than to suggest that he knows what she is, just like the concierge.
Right.
Right? I know what you are. I know that you're involved in this. But then if you're going to introduce that, do something with it. Have there be an element of danger for the Báthory character, as opposed to introducing this and then having it go nowhere.
Yeah, I feel like I need to go off on this detective a little bit. So he starts off as just a citizen in Bruges. And I kind of knocked it for kind of lazy exposition. Like this random citizen is just explaining everything and all the history and backstory to what's been happening with these disappearing women to Stefan. Fair enough. Okay, that's your role. But then he shows up at the hotel as like a detective. So how did you figure out this is what they were staying? Mm-hmm. Can you not afford a car? This dude is on a bike. No. And there's scenes where they're driving like out in the countryside and Buddy's randomly on his bike on the side of the road and then follows them.
And then just shows up like seconds later.
But he's on a bike. So how are you trailing this car when you're on your bike, which is you're going to be miles behind? There's a scene where they are on a cliffside doing something, which I won't spoil.
Yeah.
He shows up, stands there.
And it looks the way they film it, like he's witnessed what they're doing and what they've done, but nothing comes of it.
But they see that he's there, no?
Yeah.
And
it seems that way to me.
Right. And then, again, randomly he's on his bike, and you've already alluded to it. So they run him over. So what purpose did this character serve? And in a vampire film, this could have been one guy who maybe she killed in a way, becoming of a vampire. Like she could have sucked his blood or like not just ran him over with a car. I found the whole detective thing just laughable. So I found there were so many things in this film that frustrated me or pulled me out of the film or just made me question the believability, which made it really hard for me to appreciate like the good things going on. But the detective really irked me.
I mean, I can see that. Like you could make the same argument for the concierge. I mean, you've got this hotel in off season. What is this? The Overlook? You've only got one employee, the concierge, and that's it. Like the whole hotel is empty. Originally, when Stefan and Valerie get there, they're by themselves with one employee in this grand hotel on a waterway.
And his line about, oh, you look familiar or you've been here, but you're...
Oh, yeah.
I just found kind of lazy.
Yeah. I mean, it could have been, I think a better exposition would have been something like we saw in The Shining, where you see a spark of recognition and he like goes back to old photos or something where he's like confused and a little bit disturbed by the fact that he's seeing her again. But I mean, he comments on it and then it's almost like, Oh yeah. Well,
Yeah.
does she say something like that was my mother or something like that?
I think, or is that how he says? Oh, it must have been your mother, or must have been your mother because it couldn't.
Okay.
Yeah, someone says that. Yeah.
Yeah. Couldn't have been you.
Yeah. So what do you think? Do we want to give our final thoughts and move on to
Okay,
spoiler talk,
so-
or is there other?
Yeah. No, I think it's time to move on to spoiler stuff. So again, I'll come back to what I said at the beginning. I think if you're a horror film fan, particularly, I won't just say film fan, and you want to have that historical background of not necessarily just vampire films, but you want to fill in some historical gaps, then I say, yeah, go ahead and look at this with the lens that we've provided for you. Like it has weaknesses. There are things that are going to be a struggle for a modern viewer. I do think from a film perspective and filmmaking perspective, there are things that you can take away from this film that are interesting.
Because I was baffled. I went and watched a bunch of reviews and read a bunch of reviews. And the thing everyone seems to point to is either Delphine Seyreg's performance or like this kind of revolutionary depiction of a vampire.
Yeah, yeah.
And sure, if you're only looking at those two elements, sure, it's good.
Okay.
But I feel like people weren't really
taking it as a whole.
Critiquing a lot of these other things, which I found really glaring.
Okay.
So I get that in its historical context, it's an important film, perhaps, for vampires.
Right.
All that being said, I would say avoid this film.
Okay.
Unless you're like a vampire completionist and your goal is to watch like every vampire film.
Okay.
I feel like you can read about this film and look at some stills and kind of get a sense for what it is. I don't know if there's enough here to recommend people spend their time.
Mine would be a provisional watch, but maybe not as definitively no as yours.
Yeah.
Okay, so just to be fair, so that's it. That's the mostly spoiler-free conversation. We're just going to jump into spoilers now. So if you don't want to hear any spoilers, then we'll see you on the next episode.
Oh yeah, next episode is going to be The Exorcist 3. Not the first Exorcist, but the third one.
Okay.
All right, so going into spoilers, where to start? I think the thing that really bothered me sort of was all of the kill scenes just made me laugh. The way Alona like falls in the shower, knocks over all this stuff.
That was ridiculous.
Grabs onto a razor blade as hard as possible, doesn't let go, and then somehow manages to fall onto it awkwardly and it stabs her in the back and kills her. Like if you were an athlete trying to pull that off, I feel like you couldn't even do that. So that just...
Not only was that, I mean, it was a ridiculous production, that whole scene.
Yes.
But a straight razor is only sharp on the razor side.
Exactly.
The other end is round, like the end of it is rounded and blunted. You would have to fall from a pretty serious height for that even to impale you.
Yeah.
Other than just bruise you. And then where it hits her, it's like, how did you bleed out that quickly?
She's like dead instantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it was totally unbelievable for me too.
So that scene, which maybe could have been powerful or more impactful, I was just rolled my eyes and kind of laughed at it because it just seemed ridiculous. Also, I expected when he pulled her into the shower, because I thought it would burn her. I was waiting for some kind of practical factor, but it didn't really do that. Maybe that's a budgetary thing.
And she seemed afraid of the shower.
Totally.
And then nothing comes of that. It's like,
she just didn't want to get wet? Or?
Yeah, it's like if you're afraid of the shower, then what's the point? Like it could have, as a practical, you could have had her even just pull her arm in and then show a burned hand or something.
Smoke. You don't even need crazy effects, but
just something more than just her being afraid of getting in the shower.
Yeah. So that kind of took me out of it. Again, the detective being run over by the car, I just laughed because it just seems so absurd. And then
Stefan's death scene is ridiculous.
So ridiculous. So yeah, Valerie and Bathory are pushing a salad bowl onto this guy's head, which even if you manage to do that, I don't feel like that would kill him. So, and the funny thing is there's knives and forks and broken glass all around. Why don't you use those? But no, and I don't know if he's trying to do this, like trying to be humorous. But then the bowl snaps in half and just perfectly somehow falls onto his wrist.
Yeah. And
slits them both perfectly. And again, I'm just laughing and rolling my, like, I don't feel like is this the impact you're trying to have on the viewer?
Well, it's funny I read somewhere, I was just reading a bunch of stuff last night and I saw something about caustic humor in the film, and they didn't give examples. They just made that comment. And I thought, okay, I was trying to come up with examples. I mean, and so that makes me wonder, as you just say that, is like, was that meant to be funny? Was it because it doesn't come across
just
as
looked
funny?
ridiculous.
From a modern standpoint, it just looks ridiculous.
Even for the time, looked ridiculous. I feel like this is a 70s film. This isn't like the 30s. So there's a lot of
there's a lot more realistic things going on in the 70s.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And if the gore didn't look great, that's fine. But they could have like tried to stab him with something or use your teeth. I don't know. I just found the pushing a salad bowl onto his head that breaks perfectly and falls right on his wrist and slits them. I just thought that was so dumb.
Well, even do something like you've got two women there in an ostensibly, lesbian horror film. Why not play on male fantasy and have them seduce him?
Sure.
And then like kiss his arms and then ravage his wrists and rip his wrist open, like
which would totally fit with the film more than a random salad bowl. Like there is a lot of absurd, ridiculous things in this film, and I don't know if those were intentional or not.
Well, and one of the things that I've wondered a few times as I think about the film is there something going on either culturally for Belgium or Europe or whatever of the time that is just going over my head? Like, is there something that I'm missing that is just not landing with me in 2023? Like, I don't know.
Well, it's funny because you reference Evolution of Horror is the reason you listened or you wanted to watch this film. So I listened to that and they're just like, oh yeah, I loved it. It's hilarious. They're pushing a bowl onto his head. But I don't know. I guess they love that. But I just found it, to me, that totally took away from which could have maybe been like an impactful scene.
Yeah, because it doesn't, and again, maybe the humor is like I would say that I think I'm pretty good at picking up on even subtle humor.
Yes.
I don't find anything funny about this film other than being ridiculous, like not intentionally humorous.
No. Or
like a little nod and a wink, like this is a little bit funny. Like the tone of the film is very serious.
Yeah.
Unless I'm missing something and I'm way off the mark there.
Yeah. So the disconnect there, I don't know. And then there's two more things. So the mother, which do you want to talk about that part?
Yeah. So in the early part of the film, when they're just married and they keep referencing, she wants him to let his mother know that they've been married, and he keeps putting it off and putting it off and putting it off and keeps saying, yes, I'll go over and let her know. And then once I've let her, I don't even know if he says her, but I'll let mother know. And then you can come and visit or whatever. So finally he phones, and there's a scene with the concierge where he gives him a piece of paper and a tip saying, say that there was nobody home or
that
nobody
part
answered. So it builds tension there. But then when he actually talks to air quotes mother, it's a flamboyantly gay man in his 40s, maybe 50s.
Yeah. Eating orchids or something?
Yeah, without any context. Like, okay, is Stefan bi and this is his sugar daddy and he wasn't supposed to get married? Like, mother doesn't seem to be too concerned about the fact that Stefan got married. I would say my perception was he's intrigued, and he talks about meeting Valerie and so on. And to me, thinking as a horror film, I was reading between the lines going, oh, I wonder if he's like intrigued to meet Valerie because there's something going to go on that. Like, so to me, the film built that up and then boom, it was gone. There was nothing, not even a reference to it afterwards. And it's like, okay, is Stefan in some kind of weird predatory relationship with mother? And they're like, they bring people back and something's going on. Like, it made no sense to me whatsoever.
100%. Yeah, I get that maybe you would put an interesting twist that he's bi or he has a gay lover, but like he's a hot body, good looking, whatever. Is he going to be with this like 50-year-old flamboyant dude? Maybe, maybe not. It just didn't work for me. It just felt really random and totally unexplained.
Well, and a lot of the long scenes, like in the hotel and stuff, that you could have done something with mother. Like,
yes,
you could have. It's again like the detective. It's a lost opportunity. You've introduced this character, but to what end? Like, why didn't you do something with the character where maybe there was some secret relationship and mother was kind of puppeteering Stefan, or mother was abusive to Stefan and that's why he was so sadistic with other people? Like, something. Give us something to connect this character to the story of Stefan and Valerie.
Which seemed throughout the whole film, there's just these disconnected kind of random elements, like the detective, like you put it in there, but it didn't really serve a purpose. Like, what is that supposed to do for us as a viewer? Like, I get after that scene is when he beats Valerie really badly. So is he like a self-loathing?
Yeah, like maybe he's in the closet with Mother. And this is a show that he's like a sham marriage where he's getting married to prove that he's heterosexual. And then, like you say, his own self-hatred and self-loathing, he beats Valerie. And it's a pretty vicious beating scene and rape in the film.
Which he full-on backhands her to the face.
Yeah.
She has bruises all over her body, yet her face is completely unmarked the next morning, which again bugged me.
That was a very uncomfortable scene, actually. Like I have to say, it was not only came out of the blue, and I wasn't anticipating that, but it was viciously filmed, I felt.
And again, she goes back to him and says how much she Bathory has to take her back. But how would you go back to him after that by your own will? I don't know. Yeah, it just seems so many elements of this film are just psychologically unbelievable. Like I just didn't buy for a second that there was any relationship between the mother and Stefan, and it didn't serve a purpose in terms of the plot or the character.
Ends. Yeah.
It just seemed really random in a bad way.
And it had me wondering, is there a cut of the film that makes sense in, or I'm not aware of that. I hadn't come across it. Like, is there a director's cut that would tie up those ends and connect things? But if that's the case, why would you cut those scenes out of the film and leave the cut that we saw as so random and disconnected? Like, it made no sense to me.
Yeah. And then finally, Bathory, who's like a veteran vampire who's been around since like the 15 or 1600s, makes a rookie mistake of staying out during the daytime too long and dies.
Yeah.
Like, give me a break. Like, this is like a master vampire who's been around for centuries.
Yeah.
And then just doesn't look at the time and gets caught out in the daylight and dies. Like, come on. Like, I can get like maybe they trick her or they do something to try and get her out in the daylight. But she says, oh, look at the time. Oh, the sun's coming up. That I couldn't buy that either.
Well, and again, because we're in the sport, like the way she dies is redonkulous too. I mean, I have to say, I do like the end, the very end, and how Valerie has now taken on that role and she's seducing a couple at a resort or whatever.
Yeah, the tennis couple.
Yeah. I mean, I did like how they wrapped that up, but I mean, Bathory's death scene is silly.
And again, just kind of comes out of the blue.
Yeah.
They're just driving along like, oh, sun's coming up. And then sun comes up and...
Well, and then they crash the car. She goes through the windshield. She's impaled on a branch.
Tree.
And then the car, sets on fire or whatever. And we see the melting wax all of Bathory.
So, like, I get the significance of the representation of the vampire in its historical context. I get that there's some style. But it's shocking to me that all these glowing reviews just completely overlook all of these other elements and seeming flaws and just give them a pass.
Yeah, I mean, I that's fair. I have no comeback for that.
And part of my, like, if this had no nudity or sex in it, would it still get the same attention? Like, are people looking to like uphold a film that has sex and nudity and make it seem artistic as an excuse to like revel in it? Or... I don't know. I couldn't quite understand why people love this film so much when I found it so ridiculous. Yeah, this is one of the worst films I've watched in a long time, I think. Well, it's up there, down there with some of the other ones. Like I did not like this. What are we reviewing next episode?
All right. So, well, it's your choice. You tell us. Next episode.
Oh, yeah. Next episode is going to be The Exorcist 3. Not the first Exorcist, but the third one.
Okay.
We'll see you in the aisles. Thanks so much for listening to Dudes of the Dead podcast, where Maniac Mike and Leatherface Lee break down their latest horror movie recommendations.
The show is researched, written, and hosted by Mike Vincent and Lee Neese. Produced and edited by Lee Neese. Special thanks to Aaron Jabs for the outro music. This has been a Neesely Done podcast production.